Hello. Welcome to our last pre-COP30 webinar with the Buildings and Global Cooling Pavilion, hosted by the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. We are very pleased to talk to you today about the market transformation work that we have been doing together over these last 2 years and providing you with a stock take on progress across the market transformation action agenda. We're very happy to come together here just before many of us are traveling to Brazil, so that we can take collective stock of the remaining gaps as well as opportunities to drive market transformation together. My name is Roland Honziker, and I'm the Director for Built Environment here at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We launched 18 months ago the Market Transformation Action Agenda as a collective co-created agenda with several hundred organizations and professionals in the built environment to provide us with a common roadmap on how we can decarbonize the built environment along its full value chain and life cycle. Because only with radical collaboration around the three levers of whole life carbon accounting, setting carbon next to cost, and transforming supply and demand can we truly make progress and halve emissions by 2030 and reach full decarbonization by 2050. We are now taking stock of this progress, and we are driving this agenda under the market transformation hub of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. The GlobalABC brings all stakeholders together, whether we are governments, whether we are from finance, from the business sector, or organizations active across the built environment. And it helps us with that deep collaboration. And WBCSD, we have been convening this work. We bring together global companies along the full value chain who need this transformation because they are investing in the transition and they need everybody to move in the same direction based on a common language. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our speakers of today. We will first hear from our colleagues at Arup, Will Wild, as well as Steve Hill, on the key messages from our stock take on the market transformation. I will then be moderating a brief panel conversation with our distinguished colleagues, Sophie Chick from the Urban Land Institute, Rama Dunajevic from Autodesk, Anil Sawhney from RICS, and Scott Tew with Train Technologies. And Jonathan Dewin, our colleague at the GlobalABC and UNEP, will kindly share some closing remarks to send us on the way to COP30 and Brazil. Thank you for that. I'm also very pleased to let you know that the report is now live. You will be able to find it on the WBCSD website, and we are briefly going to now talk to you about those key messages out of the report. But then you can download it, you can go through it at your own pace, and we very much look forward to engaging on this work and the content and findings. With that, it is my great pleasure now to hand over to you, Will, as well as Steve, to talk us through the key findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland, and thank you all for being here. Roland's kindly given me bit of time to talk a bit about the framing of this report and how it lands at COP as we are a week away from COP30. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak with Paul Watkinson, one of the lead EU negotiators behind the Paris Agreement and a real force behind negotiations at COP over the last decade. And he said something that really stuck with me for the last few weeks because he really underscored not to think of COP as something that's static, but think of it as something that's continually evolving. The Paris Agreement, reached back in 2015, was a landmark of ambition, but it's taken almost a decade of negotiations to complete what's often called the rule book behind it. With COP29 last year in Baku, finalizing the Article 6 agreement on carbon markets as one of the final pieces of that rule book, meaning that it's now almost effectively complete. So it's from this context that as we move towards COP30, Paul's reflection was that success is not going to be measured by what's announced by Ambassador Largo as he brings down the gavel in the early hours of the morning at the end of COP30. And we measured about how we're implementing what's already agreed, particularly under the outcomes of the global stocktake. The way I like to think about it is sort of the rules of the game are now written. Our role is to play the game and to show that it works. And as COP evolves, I think so too does the ambitious voice of business, cities, and industries as we show up at COP. And I know many of you here are packing your bags this week, and some of you may already be in transit on the way to COP. Rightly, there is a key need for these actors to bring high ambition to COP through strong, credible commitments that show government what's possible and where the level of ambition is at. But as governments move from negotiating to delivering, so too can the role of non-state actors can expand as well, from showcasing commitments to showcasing implementation. So one of the questions that I've sat with this year is how do we bring that demonstration of implementation around this sector to COP in a way that builds confidence with government? And that's where I think this report plays a vital role, not the complete picture, but certainly a key part of it. By taking stock on the interventions under the market transformation agenda, it gives us a snapshot of how and where business and industry are knuckling down to tackle some of the most critical barriers for transformation. And in doing so, to me, I feel it sends an injection of confidence to governments as they prepare to meet at COP30, a clear show of support behind the policies and regulations needed to transform this sector at scale. Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Will. Yes, I'm Stephen Hill. I'm Arup's Net Zero Carbon Skills Lead in London. I'm been for a few years now, part of Arup's partnership with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You've just heard from Will, who was our lead author for this new publication, along with other colleagues in Arup and, of course, at WBCSD. We've been looking at and undertaking a stocktake of the Market Transformation Action Agenda, which, as Will was just explaining, is really, really timely at the moment as we go into COP. So the full report is published. There's a lot more detail in it than I will be able to cover in the next sort of 8 or so minutes. Roland had a link to that on the previous slide that will be circulated afterwards, so please do dive in and have a read. Starting from the beginning, what is the Market Transformation Action Agenda? In its own words, it's a co-created transformative action agenda guiding the path towards halving emissions by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. It was launched in 2023 and it was endorsed at the Buildings and Climate Global Forum in 2024. So roughly 2 years in, it's a good time to take stock of progress and to plot the path forward for the Market Transformation Action Agenda in order to make sure that it achieves its maximum impact. Originally, it was endorsed by over 80 leading organisations, and it continues to be a space for innovation, for collaboration, and particularly importantly for coordination between international organisations. It's structured around 3 levers: aligning behind whole life carbon, integrating carbon cost and price, and transforming supply and demand. And there sit a total of 11 individual intervention points that sit underneath that. The fundamental purpose of the Market Transformation Action Agenda is summed up in the concept of the ambition loop. And we dig into this in a little bit more detail in the report. So MTAA surfaces and coordinates industry leadership in built environment decarbonisation. This early action helps policymakers to understand that net zero transition is not only possible, it's happening, and it's also making good business sense. This gives policymakers the confidence to implement decarbonisation policies, thereby creating that enabling environment for that net zero transition. That in turn then drives wider adoption across industry. And again, with that wider adoption, MTAA has a role in helping disseminate best practice and drive international consistency. So it's that interaction between business and policy that ultimately drives us faster towards that net zero goal. The stocktake process that we're presenting the outcomes from today, we kicked off in a workshop at London Climate Action Week back in the summer. We followed it up with a series of one-to-one interviews with some leading stakeholders. We supplemented that with some of our own research into the leading global initiatives under the agenda. The stocktake isn't intended to be comprehensive. We haven't managed to list out every single national, subnational initiative under each of the levers and interventions. I mean, that would be an almost impossible task. What it is intended to be is a snapshot, giving an overall sense of progress towards the ultimate goal. Overall, we know that we're not yet on track to achieve net zero by 2050, as was confirmed in the GlobalABC's annual status report a few months ago. But we are seeing progress, and we are also starting to see acceleration. And we see that acceleration where policy shifts are taking place. So that interaction between industry action and policy is showing to be really important. And we're also seeing that the impact is spreading. We're seeing important signs of progress also in developing economies, and that broadening out of the agenda is really, really important and very encouraging. So I'm going to give a little summary of activities under each lever. Again, there is much more detail in the report, so please do engage in that. Undoubtedly, the biggest shift that we have seen is on whole life carbon, which is really starting to embed and starting to drive change. We have a number of national methodologies now that are standardizing the measurement of whole life carbon reporting. There's still some divergence of approaches, but there is a work towards international consistency. Where those methodologies have been embedded, we are starting to see broader uptake, which means we're getting more data out at a building level in terms of the whole life carbon performance of those buildings. That means that we are starting to understand and benchmark performance and starting to understand what good looks like. Whole life carbon is increasingly considered within international certifications, although there's still a degree of diversity, and certainly more consistency in that area would help. And we are starting also to see whole life carbon coming into policies. So we have the EPBD across the EU from 2028. We have a number of national policies in place and a number of local policies too. Those are mainly around transparency, but we have seen in a number of cases that transparency can be a really important driver for change. We've included here two of the stocktake diagrams, looking at two of the individual interventions that sit under that lever one. There are many more of these in the report, so again, please do dive into the detail. The heat maps show the scale of activities under each intervention. The dot at each node shows the number of initiatives at that node. If you look on the left-hand side at lever 4, intervention 4, sorry, data shows a lot of activity ranging right from the local to the global level. And you can see that if you look kind of going up from bottom right to top left, you see there are some supportive actions, some foundational actions, but the actions go right through to embedding. And once you've got embedded actions at a national level, that really means you're seeing a substantial drive for change. So that is a really encouraging picture. If you look at intervention 5, again, we see actions from the national up to the global level. But we see that those actions are really concentrated in the foundational level. With some catalytic action, but we're not really seeing the scale of embedded action that would mean we're driving rapid and widespread change. So there's under the area of standards alignment, there is definitely progress still to be made and an opportunity to drive this further forward. So if we look then at intervention 2, that stat at the top there from ULI, 93% of surveyed European firms reported that transition risk is now something that they consider in decision making, and that's that transition risk essentially is bringing into mainstream considerations around decarbonisation of assets and carbon stranding risk, and that normalisation of transition risk is really important because it means that increasingly we are seeing carbon performance of assets and decarbonisation brought into that mainstream. It's not just something that is thought about by leading players as a means of differentiation. It's a risk that applies across the market, and that's really important. In order for that to work, we need the tools. So CREM as an operational carbon stranding tool has been around for a while. The ULI's Preserve tool is the latest launch in this space, looking at transition risk assessment. That helps companies understand the risk, disclosure obligations, whether they're voluntary or mandatory, require that some of that information to be shared. And then the last point, the holy grail, if you like, is bringing in considerations of ESG and carbon performance into property valuation. We're starting to see some guidance on that now. So some really important moves in this space. Looking then under lever 3, transforming supply and demand. Globally, this does remain a very mixed picture. Consistency is still a barrier. We've talked a little bit about certifications. The diversity of certifications is definitely an issue. The different ways that green finance is defined also remains an issue, but we are seeing progress. These are built on the foundation of corporate commitments, things like the World Green Building Council's Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment, which played an important role in getting organizations to focus in this direction. There are a number of green finance taxonomies now in place, 14 national taxonomies globally. There are efforts to harmonize these and bring them together, improve consistency, which is important. There are some actions going on to improve access to green finance in third world or developing countries in particular, which is really important. We're starting to see moves in the supply chain, things like concrete zero and steel zero, which are a positive sign that the supply chain sees that there is a market for decarbonised materials. And we're starting to see some policies which are focused specifically on manipulation of supply and demand for decarbonised or net zero buildings. New York City's Local Law 97 is one great example, but they are very localised at the moment. There's a lot of opportunity for expansion here. So that hopefully gives you just a sense of the progress that we're seeing under each of the individual interventions. The other aspect of the report is looking at the relationship between the Market Transformation Action Agenda and the Buildings Breakthrough. And if you think about these two things as being at the opposite ends of the ambition loop, so the Market Transformation Action Agenda is very much about coordinating and driving industry action. The Buildings Breakthrough is very much about policy. It was supported by 29 countries, and it's very much about creating consistency in policy that drives us towards decarbonisation and also towards resilience. It's too much detail to represent here. We've done a detailed comparison between the two, and overall you see that these two things sit very comfortably together. We've identified one or two small gaps that we will be looking to address as we go forward. Importantly, though, in terms of consistency, these both sit under the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction umbrella, if you like, part of the UN Environment Programme. So these are very much the components of how we move forward in terms of driving towards the decarbonised property sector. So in terms of recommendations for where we take the Market Transformation Action Agenda next, we have recommendations around improving awareness. Visibility of the MTAA across the broader commercial market is really important. We think there's work to do there, and particularly that's true in emerging markets, making sure that emerging markets are fully represented and aware of the MTAA. And we also need a framework to monitor progress as we go forward. So this is the first attempt to measure progress in some extent against the MTAA. We need a framework to allow us to do that on an ongoing basis. There are a number of areas we picked up where we think the MTAA could focus more going forward. Access to data in developing countries, also access to affordable finance, enhanced focus on capacity and skills, which is actually something that's stronger in the Buildings Breakthrough, and we think MTAA could focus more on that. Also making sure that the residential sector is fully represented. There's a little bit of a commercial bias at the moment that we're keen to find a way to correct. So we do think there's an opportunity for a review and an update of the MTAA. This needs to bring in that 80 plus stakeholders that were involved originally, but a whole new group of stakeholders, particularly broadening out geography, taking in developing economies and making sure those voices are heard. We're recommending that starts as a review and update process in 2026. With a view to concluding ahead of the Buildings and Climate Global Forum in 2027. So to kind of bring this all back together, if we're going to get to net zero by 2050, and never mind halving emissions by 2030, MTA is really the key to this. It brings industry together, it coordinates industry, and it helps us reinforce that ambition loop, supporting ambitious policy. And really, there's no time to lose. We need to keep going. We need to keep pushing forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve and Will. And thank you very much to Arup for your support on doing this stock take on the market transformation. This is a very rich report, and we could only just scratch the surface. So we do invite you and encourage you to really take a good read. We've tried to give it a go at all initiatives that we are aware of that deliver two parts of the market transformation. And it is really only together that we can drive it. No single organization can really manage such a transition on its own. As a WBCSD, we help coordinate, we help align, we help bring together different actors, but it needs all of us in this. So with that, I would like to tee up a very short, because it will be very short, panel discussion ahead of COP. And as Will outlined before, we are at a critical moment. COP30 wants to focus on the delivery of the commitments that have been made and also see that deep collaboration. So I'd like to now call up my esteemed colleagues, Sophie, Rama, Anil, and Scott, if you would switch on your video as well. And I don't see you yet. We need to expand my view. There we go. Now I can see you all. Yeah, that's great. So I just wanted to briefly introduce you, and then I'll take down the slide so we can all see each other as well. So thank you for joining us. And as Will was saying, we are at an important moment. We want to speak about this transformation agenda also at the COP and really go into the discussions of how we support each other. So maybe starting with you, Scott, with Train Technologies as a climate solutions leader, can you reflect a bit more on the overall importance of market transformation? Or let's say if we didn't have it, what would be missing from your side? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Roland, and thanks for everyone joining. I agree that we're at a really critical moment. I love the title of the report, Market Transformation, because it really encapsulates what has to happen. And we're finally have arrived at the moment where transformation is possible. One of the things that I'm most excited about is that no longer do we have to wait for solutions that in the past were not as common as what we see today. And the report points out not just what's needed for the transformation to occur, but also what's possible, and does a good job, I think, of balancing the two. I mean, for instance, Roland, 75% of the existing buildings today will still be with us in 2050. And if we think about that, we have to do something now to make sure that they're operating better in the future than they're operating today. And we don't have to wait for that anymore. So what we're most excited about is this power of transformation. We focused a lot on the supply and demand lever of the market transformation area, and including making sure that we are bringing to market innovative products that help decarbonize the built environment. They exist today from data overlays. We can't have a meeting today and not go 5 minutes without saying AI, but certainly there's some power in data. The data will actually give us the proof to achieve the financing that's needed. It also gives us what's needed to manage the buildings better, to ensure their performance. We have those technologies today. We also have the other innovations needed, things like heat pumps to electrify buildings. And the bigger issue, though, is the entire supply chain is poised for transformation. We, as Stephen mentioned, we're part of the Steel Zero commitment. We have come a long ways. 3 or 4 years ago, that was still a dream. And we're actually purchasing today low emission steel already. It's not completely Steel Zero, but we're certainly much closer now than we even were 2 or 3 years ago. And so across the supply chain, we've never had the innovations and the possibilities that we see today. So whether it's the equipment and the services for buildings that's needed, or whether we're looking for policy and financing. The good news is that this report is going to point out that all of the levers are in place to make tremendous gains with the built environment.
Thank you very much, Scott, for that. Your message is the solutions are there, and we are
They
working
are.
on it. And I think that is what the market transformation shows, really. We are working on the standardization piece, on really integrating the carbon in the discussion, and we see a lot happening. And I think Steve's slide also showed there is a lot happening, and we're trying to also capture that. Thank you very much for that, Scott. Rama, I'd like to come to you. As Autodesk, you've been working very closely with a group of companies, also under the umbrella of WBCSD, really focusing on lever one. How do we better align around whole life carbon accounting? Can you tell us a little bit more about this critical aspect of the work you have convened? Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. And again, thanks to all the panelists. It's such an interesting conversation, and for Autodesk and for me, right? The thing about the market transformation, and Will said this really nicely when he did the tee-in, and was talking about COP not being a moment in time, but being part of an evolution. And what the market transformation provides us is that context to say that we don't lose that moment in time, but it becomes part of an overall strategy. And that's how we need to think about that transformation. As Scott said, right? Transformation is the right word to use, because if we start thinking about the process and then evolve through it, we have the potential to get to that happening by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And so the way that Autodesk thinks about it, Autodesk is a 3D design and make software company. So we need to start thinking about the data. I would thought when Scott said we can't have a conversation without saying AI, I thought he was going to say data. So there we go. So at Autodesk, we think about the data from day one, from that concept to making it a reality. And through the WBCSD and the work on the market transformation and Lever One, we've been working with a number of large companies to start chunking out parts of the process where the data is getting lost. So we came up with this concept a number of years ago at London Climate Action Week. There'll actually be a panel about this, the results of of 2 years of findings later on this same channel. And Arup, AECOM, Arcadis, Foster & Partners, Ramble, and SOM came together. They had one BIM model, and we spent 3 months agreeing on what those parameters of that BIM model would be, what we would be measuring. And we said embodied carbon measurement is done differently by everyone. There's no set way to do an embodied carbon measurement. So what can Autodesk do? How can technology make that easier? This is our Chief Sustainability Officer, Joe Spiker, often says sustainability is a data problem. So we see this as a data problem. So how can we address that data? And so we spent months. Those 6 companies dug in, did an embodied carbon assessment of one building, and came back. And it turns out that the differences of the embodied carbon measurement of that one building and one piece of that one building was 34%. And so then we wrote a report on it. It was published on the WBCSD website about a year ago, I think October 2024. And then we spent the next year with those same 6 companies, real experts in the field, to do an assessment of why is that a 34% difference. We were able to bring it down by over 40%. There's still a 19%. I'm blowing the lead, but when you read the report, you'll see there's still a 19% difference, and you'll hear the reasons for that in that panel. But the thinking is that if we can start chunking out these pieces, come up with real solutions, work in collaboration with other companies, because that's the only way we'll move forward. And what we ended up doing is saying, okay, well, these 6 companies, experts in the field, spent 2 years doing this assessment. Let's come up with some best practices and guidelines on how to set up your BIM for embodied carbon measurement. And so that's what they've done. There's a step-by-step guide how to set up the BIM for your embodied carbon measurement that we've contributed back. It was published last month, also on the WBCSD website, a guide to alignment in the built environment. And our hope is that through this kind of work, through this kind of collaboration, because again, collaboration should be the first option, not the last resort. Like first collaboration and then figure out how to come up with solutions for the built environment. So that's what we've done through this BIM collaboration under the umbrella of the WBCSD, and helping to push forward market transformation by carving that out. And we're just launching now the next phase of the embodied carbon transformation, because again, as Roland, you set it up, it's whole life carbon, not embodied carbon. So, but we need to take pieces that we can actually attack and try to solve and come up with guidelines and move us closer to alignment with one language. And that's what the market transformation allows.
Thank you very much, Ram. I think you really give an excellent example. Market transformation is our common agenda, and there's bits and pieces that we can take on with different groups of organizations, companies. And what I really like about this work is the 6 companies together touch on quite a number of projects globally. So I think there is also huge potential, and we're inviting also more companies to really be part of this journey and help us in this alignments. And driving this forward. So thank you very much for this example.
I will just add, and thanks to the companies, because the WBCSD provides that opportunity for competitors to say, this is not about competition, this is about solving for decarbonization of the built environment, which accounts for 42% of, greenhouse gas emissions. So this is about companies coming together and thinking about that, having a decarbonization thought first, and displacing competition as the competitive advantage.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Anil, I'd like to turn to you now. Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. You were one of the early supporters and strong supporters of market transformation. What does it mean to you, and what perspective do you have on the MTAA, but also the linkage, as we've shown with Steve before, with the buildings breakthrough, how the two can reinforce each other?
Thank you, Roland. Thank you, WBCSD and GlobalABC, for putting this webinar together. Roland, the best thing to do to a panelist to bring the world's best speakers before them. So I was taking notes and seeing where I can pitch in. So I will talk about slide 7, and that took half of my thunder. Then Stephen brought up slide 14, which Rama also within the panelists commented, love this slide. So if you see that slide, it talks about market transformation on one side, policy transformation on one side, and a line connecting the two. So I was thinking to myself, how can I add to this? We can simply add to this by putting another circle on top of that bridge or the line. That's where our professional practice, our members, our actual practitioners, individual. Obviously, it's about companies, it's about governments, it's about communities, but that at the end of the day, we have professional members also. So RICS members would sit in that little circle connecting the two. We implement projects. Our members go out, do decarbonization, reduce carbon, and work on projects. They work for private sector entities, they work for public sector entities and governments, and that's really the bridge that connects the two transformations also. So that is the very reason why, Roland, early on, we pitched in, and one of my former colleagues who's also on the call today from basically convinced RICS and our members that this is an area that we should really support, collaborate, and move things forward. Earlier, about an hour ago, I was invited to speak to a group of investors in the data center world. And Scott, what better platform to bring data, AI, and decarbonization together? So I was given a 10-minute slot to pitch the importance of embodied carbon and why should data centers, especially these AI and training data centers which use so many GPUs, should worry about that. I think that's where the policy and the market transformation really come together, and where we can showcase how decarbonization efforts are not a one team activity. It's a collective, it's a collaborative initiative where we need to bring what Rama talked about, these chunks of excellence where companies come together, show what's missing. In fact, There's still a lot of gap. We should all appreciate data is not still relevant. I saw Stephen really connect what's already out there from personal experience. We have members practicing in Africa who are still searching for EPDs for common materials that you would find in a typical building. So I think the requirement is huge. The effort needed is quite large, but it can come together if we don't have these kinds of initiatives. So we are fully supportive of level 1 interventions 3 and 4. I think our whole life carbon assessment professional standard second edition provides that discussion platform where that chunking can take place and everyone can talk the same language, bring it to implementation, publish best practice, and move the needle forward. So what we also early on, with your help, Roland, and your colleagues, appreciated that for level 1 interventions 3 and 4, you really need a market instrument or a vehicle. So jointly with you and the International Code Council, we are planning to launch a global coalition that will talk in terms of, it's called CLEAR. It's the Coalition for Life Cycle Emissions Alignment and Reporting, in which what Rama has done with 6 companies can be expanded, especially to the global south, and we can bring those best practices, alignments, and harmonization together. We all have to agree that there is no single standard that can serve all countries, all regions. So best thing we can do is mapping and bridging, which is what really is fundamentally what Will and Stephen highlighted in the report that was produced. So congratulations to Arup and WBCSD for giving us another excellent resource which we can use to convince internal and external stakeholders. So thanks for the opportunity, Roland.
Well, thank you, Anil, and really thank you also to RICS for the work we do together. And as you say, we work on this globally, but also in the different regions, and really making sure also in the next phase that we really address the challenges across those different regions. Sophie, last but not least, we like to spare the best for last. ULI Europe, through the Sea Change program, you actually inspired much of the market transformation because you took that system intervention approach to real estate through the Sea Change program. And currently you're focusing, among other things, of course, on transition risk. So I'd like to just briefly hear from you also on this importance of the market transformation and the work you do that was mentioned already before. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Roland, and thank you, Stephen, for mentioning the Preserve tool earlier. I think we've had some really great examples from my fellow panelists today, and I wanted to share one that we're working on as well that sort of feeds into this bigger picture market transformation agenda. So, as you mentioned, we have a program within ULI called Sea Change, focusing on the decarbonisation of real estate in Europe. And since that began 4 years ago, we've been focusing on transition risk, and in particular, how transition risk isn't currently being measured in the value of real estate. So we worked with a number of our members and the wider real estate industry. And 2 years ago, we launched a transition risk assessment guidelines, which sort of outlined a standard approach to calculating climate transition risk in property valuations. And I say a standard approach because similar to what we heard earlier, lots of different people were doing this in different ways already. We heard the statistic earlier. People are looking at transition risk, but there wasn't a standard approach, and there were still a lot of companies who weren't taking into account transition risk in the value of real estate. So we launched these guidelines, but actually we wanted to take it a step further and make it as easy as possible for people to put these guidelines and this transition risk into their financial models. So this is where Preserve comes in. So this is a spreadsheet-based tool designed to link directly with your discounted cash flow models. And it really is to assess that financial impact of the net zero transition on real estate investment models. And the key here is that it's for the investment and the asset managers to use. The sort of ESG specialists and the valuers are sort of secondary users to it. So it's looking at that kind of in-house for those investors, developers, etc. And we really want to shift the mindset that decarbonisation is just a cost. And actually, we want to use this to frame decarbonisation as a commercial opportunity to preserve, hence the name, the value of the asset over the longer term. And this is sort of a tool to show you how you can do this. So we've worked really closely with the industry to build this tool, and we were very excited. In June this year, we had our first working prototype of it. It was piloted, and we're now in a wider piloting stage with different asset owners and managers. And we're really hoping that we're going to be launching the tool in spring next year. It's going to be free to use for an end user. And the idea of this is to really scale up that sort of transition, make that comparable methodology utilized across the industry, and really think about sort of taking that forward. I think we hope that tools like this and the sort of other things that you mentioned within MTAA can really help that sort of investor decision making, the management of risk, and ultimately sort of accelerate the decarbonisation, which is what we're all here to do.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And it's really an excellent example how we assess that financial value and turn the discussion from a problem to an opportunity. And we really look forward to engaging with this when it comes out, and hopefully it can be tested by many folks. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
COP is coming and our webinar is coming to an end. So I would like to ask each of you, I think Scott and Anil, you're traveling to Brazil or already on your way. Sophie and Rama, you're not. But please share maybe just in a few words your expectations you may have on COP itself. But also, as Will said, it's a journey. So what are your expectations for next steps?
Yeah, thanks,
Scott,
Roland.
why don't you start here?
Yeah, I will. I'm excited about COP. I'm always excited about COP, and I know many of us know it is a journey, like you mentioned in the beginning. It's not really a destination. It's a moment in time, but it also is a signal that there are great possibilities. I mean, one of the barriers, I saw some of the questions and comments about what are the barriers. I think some of the barriers still are lack of some policy commitments. They are the engine that drives change on the ground. And so COP is certainly a moment where the signals about policy changes and alignment on things like building codes and policies that can actually push for better buildings are possible. And so I always go to COP with that in mind, and it's no different this year. I think there's still great potential for us to have a COP where we see some new alignment around policies that will drive better buildings in the future.
Thank you, Scott. Anil?
Thanks, Roland. Don't tell anyone this is my first COP, so I'm really excited to be personally attending. What I'm looking forward to is really the ICBC, which is the Intergovernment Council for Buildings and Climate. I hope I got the acronym right, but the point is governments. Because that's where that slide 14, which has had such an impression on me, will actually be tested, whether the policy transformation folks are willing to and are able to connect and listen to what the market transformation folks are talking about: tools, standards, data, certifications, labeling, finance, and decision making. So I hope that will be a very positive meeting, but it's only a small baby step or a giant baby step, which will basically get the ball moving, and hope to see more progress made by the next COP, and we are able to show that working together can actually produce results, be it in chunks, be it in helping Global South, be it helping data gaps in the data that we all know exist. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to, and I'm hoping to sort of advocate on the behalf of MTAA, GlobalABC's Material Hub. I'll be speaking on a panel. So hopefully, I think jointly with Rama, who's joining virtually, where we would talk about these global coalitions that are needed, especially clear.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Rama, over to you.
Yeah, I think I go back to the concept of why do people come together in person, to fly to somewhere distant to have these conversations. And while the event is not the thing, it is the impetus to make sure that action is happening. It is an opportunity to have conversations, and it is the additional opportunity to report that out and to make sure that the momentum is continuing so that these conversations and all this work that's happening in silos around the world, as you said, with that heat map and show what's happening. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of incredible projects, collaboration projects that are happening, and having events such as, the Climate Change Conference, in Belém, or the upcoming ICBC in Lausanne is the opportunity to say we must be held to deadlines, we must continue to move forward, we must continue to discuss it, to iron out the details, and we must collaborate. So I would say I'm most excited to see the conversations turning from concept to action, and that it's all of our responsibilities to be a part of that conversation. And the good thing about that, again, to that slide that we keep referencing, the market transformation action agenda, as well as the buildings breakthrough, creating that joint, like together, like those two projects together, those two coalitions together can help us get to a better world. So we need to continually drive forward, and the opportunity of conferences like COP or ICBC is to move that forward and hold us to account. This is not a greenwashing conversation. We must take action.
So no, thank you, Rama. And rarely has a slide had such an impact as that slide 14. Thank you for that ambition loop framing, Steve and Will, in that. Sophie, your thoughts also for COP30?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with my fellow panelists, and actually, I think sort of building on what Rama was just saying, I really like the time of year of COP because it actually just brings the topic of climate and sustainability to a much wider audience than we see in the rest of the year. And I like the fact that we see the headlines in the mainstream papers, and it takes it outside of our kind of silos where we're all very really passionate about this and we all feel really strongly. But we need to get outside of this bubble of only talking amongst ourselves and the people who already care, and take it more mainstream. And particularly, at the moment, I feel like that is really important. So this time of year is great. Let's make sure that we get some things that can make it onto that sort of mainstream news, and keep pushing that message that it is so important. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sophie, also for your support and for those words. I would like to thank everyone who's also on this webinar and generally has engaged on market transformation. Many of us remember those initial workshops where we went through those barriers and how we overcome them. I think we have today a clear action agenda and opportunities to collaborate with each other, and it really takes us all. There was a question in the chat about some events during COP. And Rama mentioned an event that will happen in the Buildings Pavilion. So you can find the full program on the GlobalABC website when it comes to all the engagements that happen during COP30. Some of them will be live streamed, maybe not all of them. Also, WBCSD, we will host an event in the Buildings Pavilion, mainly around transforming supply and demand, where we have started work on really working with corporate occupiers in the commercial market, how they can reset their expectations to decarbonize buildings, and very much working on this issue of transition risk and the investment gap that we need to overcome. So with that, it is my great pleasure now to thank Jonathan for joining us from UNEP and the GlobalABC Secretariat. You have kindly agreed to share a few closing remarks for us as we move forward to COP30. So, Jonathan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Roland, and I'm happy to join. And I'm sorry I was not able to follow the whole webinar, unfortunately. But what I want to say is that I'm glad to see the report that you have produced that shows that there is a very strong engagement from the business community, and that there is a strong belief, I would say, in the need to continue decarbonizing buildings, and even a continuity in terms of investments, even in this current period, which is quite uncertain on many fronts. So I think that's encouraging, I would say, for all of us. Of course, when we look at different markets, I mean, the European market is very special, I would say, because of all the policies and the leadership from the governments, and there actually it speaks quite a bit to what you've been. I was listening, especially the last 20 minutes, and hearing the colleagues and talking about the importance of like linking, the private sector with the side of government, and how the two sort of really work together. I mean, the points that you are working on in the market transformation, of course, are very much aligned, Roland, with all the work that we've been doing since we started the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction in 2015. And I would say over the last few years, we've been making major progress, because I think now we have like really stronger platforms on the government side, where really the governments are now sitting around the table and are ready to hear what we have to bring, and are ready to take on board what we have to bring as a buildings and construction community that's been pushing this agenda for so much time. And when I look also at the barriers, and when I look at the report, the barriers are still the same. We're talking about the need for common language, common standards, the issues related to the regulation that would really help pushing the things, and all these links sort of to finance. I think the finance will flow more easily when the standards are there and when the regulation is also there, knowing that the private sector is already there with some of the solutions and really ready to take things forward. What I also like is, looking at, when we talk about cities, we often see cities are sort of leading champions in many ways, because we have many cities that are sort of, doing a number of actions that are more ambitious than what their own governments sometimes are doing. And I do think that, we can say the same from the private sector perspective, that actually on the private sector side, there are also a number of big champions really pushing the agenda. And I think this is what we need to sort of, bring to our government partners, that they can see that they have the allies, whether it's, especially on the private sector side, to work hand in hand with them to accelerate this transition. So I think that is a very encouraging point. And there are a number of tools. I mean, mentioning about public procurement, but definitely public procurement is where the governments can really engage the industry along with their vision and ambitions for transforming the sector. So I think that's, for me, a very sort of interesting way to go faster by using public procurement, and to help transforming the market overall. And then, the market transformation action agenda was really sort of tailored to be aligned with the buildings breakthrough. And so it really shows that, the market levers and everything that we are pushing is very, very much aligned with, our group of front runner countries under the buildings breakthrough. And there we are, advancing and bringing a number of recommendations from the community directly, or tools also directly to the policymakers, also taking on board, I would say, the most progressive policies that already a number of countries have been putting forward. I think it's also about how do we help the countries that are maybe not have been able to move as fast as, let's say, Europe, for example, to actually learn from the countries that have moved ahead faster, so that they can adopt those policies quicker. So it's really about the idea of trying to leapfrog, especially when we talk about the big part of the world where a lot of the construction will be happening going forward. So, yeah, and finally, I heard the point about having our Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate. I think this for us is now finally a moment that we, I think for the GlobalABC, had been sort of dreaming of for a long time. When do we have like a large platform where a number of governments are committed behind a common declaration to see climate action accelerating in the sector and committing to it? And now we have that platform. And again, while we have front-runner countries under the buildings breakthrough, everything that we do under the buildings breakthrough can be brought forward to the ICBC. And especially also, I think it's really important, as I mentioned, to show sort of that the private sector is also there to work with them hand in hand, and also act, as I said, as one of the front runners, as a champion actually also for this agenda. So I think this is where I see this collaboration really important, and I'm very pleased that we have all our private sector partners on board and also willing to really work with our government partners to take this forward. So
thank you very much, Jonathan, for these closing words. And I think that is what we're trying to show with the report, is that ambition loop, as you say. We have very committed people working on the private sector side, on the government side, in the cities. And what we really want to see is that deep collaboration. So hopefully this provides a snapshot. We encourage you to really go into the report and engage with it and look at the initiatives that are driving work. But also let's come together at the ICBC and other opportunities to understand how we can further collaborate with each other on this agenda. So with that, thank you very much for everyone who has joined. We will also share the recording more widely, and do not hesitate to get in touch with any questions you may have. So thank you all and have a nice day.
Thanks all.
thank you. Bye-bye.